This is Anish Chauhan and this is Equilibrium Security. It's time to tackle your biggest cybersecurity challenges head on. Hello everybody and welcome to episode 12 of our podcast. So this episode we're going to be talking around cybersecurity challenges in a fast changing digital world. Now it might sound like a really obvious thing to talk about, but to help me navigate this conversation I'm joined, our guest speaker this time is Professor Chitra Balakrishna, and Chitra is a Professor of Cybersecurity at Open University. Hi Chitra.
Hi Anish.
Thanks so much for joining us on this episode, and I really appreciate you giving up your time to discuss what's hopefully going to be some very interesting but wide-ranging discussions.
Pleasure's mine, and I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Great stuff. Okay, so the first question we've got then. So the first thing I'm going to ask you is, so obviously we're talking about meeting cybersecurity challenges in a fast-paced digital world. Sounds like an obvious thing to talk about because cybersecurity of its very nature is fast-paced and it's digital, but the world in which it's operating in is already fast-paced and changing constantly. So in terms of rapid deployment of new technologies, like what strategies should businesses try to adopt in order to, cybersecurity is challenging anyway. How do they evolve with those challenges?
Absolutely, yeah. Given that you've started off with, pairing cybersecurity with fast changing or rapidly changing, my response may seem a bit underwhelming, but the fact still remains that as someone who's, dabbled with grown, my career has grown with the evolution of the internet. I hit 25 years of employment this year.
Amazing.
And someone with, coming from the data networking and communications background, I can state this fact fairly confidently that no matter what technology comes into play, no matter what technology is being deployed, the core cybersecurity principles, such as the confidentiality, integrity, availability, that need to be preserved remains the same. And businesses should not be distracted by the technologies nor fear them. Unfortunately, cybersecurity as a sector sort of thrives on fear mongering, particularly when there's a emerging technology.
It does,
Instead,
yeah.
instead the businesses should focus more on securing their digital systems and sensitive information by focusing on these three critical, cybersecurity principles, basically getting their basics right. This was the case 20 years ago, and it will be the same 20 years hence. Having said that, the businesses should be aware that any new technology brings with it an additional layer of complexity, additional layer of challenge. And that challenge could be in the form of a severity of impact or the rate at which a specific attack could spread, like in the case of cloud adoptions, or in the case of IoT based sort of large scale deployment of IoT based sensors and devices. There was a drastic increase in the attack surface, which led to numerous attacks and data breaches. So businesses should be aware that there's going to be an additional layer of complexity, layer of challenge that any new technology is going to bring with it, and sort of weigh their capabilities and core competencies if they're ready to, address that additional layer of complexity.
Yeah, and going back to the first point you made around the CIA, the confidentiality, integrity, and availability, that's a principle that has been around for decades, hasn't it? And it's amazing that principle can still. It's almost evidence to the fact that it's a really important principle to have. The fact that it can transcend effectively 3 decades, it's evidence to the fact that keep these principles in mind, and it will help going forwards, won't it? Like the cloud strategy and everything else going with it.
Absolutely. I think working with the basics is the key. This space, cybersecurity, given the buzz around it, it's quite easy to be distracted. And be sort of carried away by the buzz of things and the industry terminologies that keep cropping up now and then, and be either confused or distracted. Businesses need to sort of stay on track with the basics, getting the basics first, first. Yeah.
It's almost like having it as core as a cybersecurity strategy, isn't it? Almost have that. Everything you're doing, every conversation you have, every decision you're trying to make, is it contributing to that strategy? Is it contributing
Preserving.
to?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Are we
exactly.
preserving the core principles of what
Yeah,
cyber essentially means?
yeah, exactly. Okay, brilliant. And then how about when we're introducing new technologies? How do businesses make sure you're not compromising sensitive data? Because I think you've summarized it really well. It's really easy to get swept away with the new latest trends and things that are happening and the things that we need to be doing, and such an organization has said that we need to do this, and a Gartner report says we need to do this. And how do you ensure you're not compromising sensitive data whilst trying to adopt new strategies?
Yeah, innovation and balancing innovation,
Yeah,
keeping on top of things, and it's such a cutting sort of cutthroat sector that this is.
yeah,
Businesses should stop adopting, in my view, any new technology for technology's sake, or
yeah,
just to get on the bandwagon, or as use the technology as a marketing gimmick.
yeah,
As mentioned earlier, businesses should carefully consider, weigh their relative business benefits and challenges of using a specific new technology. Perhaps it may require a thorough risk assessment. They should particularly consider if they have the resources and capabilities to address that additional layer of complexity or challenge that I mentioned that any new
yeah,
technology brings with it. But most importantly, they should again focus on the fact if they can continue to preserve those core cybersecurity principles with the adoption of the new technology. Sometimes a phased adoption might be a sensible thing to do. One of the areas that I often see businesses, even the large, very large businesses, fail many a time and pay a heavy price for it when adopting a new technology is that they fail to take on board their large employee workforce or the end users when they're bringing on these new technologies by not providing them with appropriate training, appropriate awareness, or best practice with the use of
yeah.
these new technologies. And often the consequence is numerous cyber attacks caused by human errors, which could potentially be avoided. So I think weighing the balance, the relative strengths and benefits, and of course focusing on investing in end user and large employee workforce training on these
Yeah.
new technologies perhaps is the key when you're trying to balance innovation and adoption of new technology.
Yeah, so you made a couple of points there. Let's just make sure we've sort of not skirted over anything. So you're saying first of all, it's important not to adopt something for the sake of it, right? And you also touched on the risk assessment, and that's something we talk about to a lot of organisations around carrying out a risk assessment, making sure that what we're doing is right. And then the third point is really kind of getting everybody on board and making sure that any decision make isn't made in isolation of the your workforce and everything that you're trying to be part of the strategy. Is that fair? A fair summary?
Absolutely. In fact, I don't know if I could add this. I
Of
don't know how
course.
many businesses are aware of this. The National Cybersecurity Center has a service called the Early Warning Service,
Yes.
which is a free NCSE threat notification service that tells all the subscribing organizations about potentially suspicious activity on their networks, on their systems. It
Yeah.
uses information feeds from the NCSE, of course, as well as
Yeah.
all the trusted public and commercial and even closed sources. So businesses who are intending to adopt or implement any new technology could potentially use this service so they can make sure that these new technologies have not exposed their systems to any new set of attacks or threats.
New set of
Uh,
threats and attacks. Yeah.
Absolutely. And this is a
Yeah.
free service offered by the NCSE, particularly useful for smaller businesses who can't afford the price that comes with,
Yeah. I
providing
was
the.
I was actually just going to say, actually, the point you made there is the fact that some of these services and capabilities are free and maybe they get overlooked, but actually they get adopted by some of the smaller businesses because I think, well, actually, I don't need to spend tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands on, some system that's going to, everyone's fighting towards a common goal. And some of things like that. So we'll put links in to the early warning system from the NCSE in the notes for this podcast. So yeah, thanks for squeezing that one in there. So we've talked about businesses as a whole. We haven't talked about anything specific to any particular vertical. So in some industries, healthcare or whatever it might be, let's use healthcare as an example. So industries like IoT, where they, industry healthcare, where they're using a lot of IoT, what specific security measures would somebody like an organization like that adopting IoT need to make sure they have in order to protect the critical information?
Yeah, I'll probably speak a bit more on this, given IoT in healthcare is one of my research interests, and I've sort of delved into this for the last 10 to 12 years now. So I'll provide a bit of background in terms of the adoption of IoT within healthcare itself.
Yeah.
I normally tell this example in my keynotes or talks that I give. From anesthesia to penicillin to Human Genome Project, every century has had a dramatic discovery and improvements to medical capabilities. But the current century's revolution in healthcare has got nothing to do with medicine, but it has got everything to do with technology, particularly with the large-scale deployment of IoT within the healthcare sector. What the IoT as a technology has enabled is a patient-centric, customized precision medicine that previously could not even be conceived. These IoT-based medical devices or wearables can monitor various biological functions, lifestyle habits, behavioral parameters, which previously was just not possible to measure or assess.
Yeah.
So therefore, they've revolutionized the healthcare sector like never before, but also have brought with it numerous, challenges, mainly relating to privacy and security. So a major roadblock in the large-scale adoption of IoT, while it brings this wealth of benefits and innovation, one of the roadblock is the fact that the IoT as a technology is not secure by design.
No,
and
it's not.
And
it's designed to make life easier, isn't it, rather than secure?
Absolutely. I often say this, security and convenience just don't go together.
No, that's right.
So,
In some cases,
but one of the main roadblock with the large-scale adoption of IoT within mainstream healthcare is a security threat emerging from this very fragmented ecosystem that has no interoperability and not very many established standards either. The security challenges with use of IoT within healthcare can broadly be sort of categorized into data-centric challenges and device-centric challenges. Although they're categorized into two, one feeds in to the other. Device-centric challenges are very technology, sort of dependent, technical in nature, particularly with the device manufacturers and wearables that are being created, mushrooming everywhere now, are designed with security as an afterthought. There's absolute no security by design. And data-centric concerns are mostly ethical in nature, and data-centric challenges are more to do with confidentiality of your healthcare data, reliability of all of this data that's measured by these IoT devices, trust. How do you trust this data? How much of this data is being poisoned by malicious actors, and how much of the data is lost in the transit of data from these weak IoT devices, or data, in terms of data reliability, data ownership. And so it's mostly ethical in nature. But the fact is that attack on weak and insecure IoT devices directly impacts the data, the sensitive data we're trying to preserve and protect, the healthcare data.
Is that possibly getting overlooked? Is it the fact that in a going back to a previous point you made about, I'm not saying healthcare organisations are adopting technology for technology's sake. However, the fact that they're driving forward the wearable tech, making life easier, is there an oversight happening in your experience from safeguarding the technical data, the sensitive data?
Yeah, absolutely. The space, the IoT within the healthcare particularly has, sort of exploded with a number of open hardware and open software players entering the space. And the core design principle is just getting into the market and quick, revenue that you can make by the wellness. We call them a consumer healthcare market. It's a huge booming market.
Yeah.
billions of dollars. So
And
obviously,
that in itself, that in itself is a problem, isn't it? It's so lucrative that it actually it transpires that it's attracting the wrong motivations, maybe.
absolutely. And the entry
Yeah.
barrier is really low given that
So
it's open hardware and open software.
yeah.
It's fantastic to have these sort of technologies and have low barriers to entry, to the market, but it comes with this, lack of thought on security and privacy,
Yeah.
which is so critical when it comes to healthcare, because the impact is not restricted to reputation or financial loss. It is life critical, safety critical when it comes to
Yeah.
healthcare.
It is.
So
Yeah.
yeah, in terms of coming to your question, sorry for the long
No, no, no.
background.
It's all good.
Coming to your question, both businesses and individuals should carefully consider the devices they use for healthcare monitoring or wellness to protect their data. From the 29th of April this year, 2024, UK law mandates manufacturers of consumer connectable products, which includes healthcare, IoT-based healthcare products, to comply with baseline security requirements based on the UK Code of Practice for Consumer IoT Security. So it's mandated now that
Okay.
most of these device manufacturers have to comply with the baseline security requirements.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
even though it might not be security, but by design, they may have
Yeah.
to meet those basic, security requirements.
And
In Yeah.
talking about a barrier to entry being quite low, in your opinion, are those requirements, are they the absolute bare minimum, or are they going far enough? I guess maybe is a question.
No, the law, there's been a lot of deliberation and discussion. I've been part of some of that consultation, which was as part of the DCIT as well. What we've got now is perhaps a great start, but there's a long way to go before we can actually secure every single device,
Of
because
course, yeah.
IoT sort of creeped into the consumer healthcare space as well as in hospital devices. There are many devices in hospital. Implantables are all
Of
IoT
course,
based,
yeah,
and they
implantables as
are,
well.
as I said earlier, as
Yeah,
life critical. And we
yeah,
have a long way to go before we can make all of those absolutely secure and safe. But
yeah,
this is a great start in terms of getting the baseline security implemented
yeah. And of course,
across the
saving
sector.
someone's life is the primary goal, the ultimate goal of what that device is there to do. But of course, imagine if something could be compromised, the impact that would have is, kind of almost doesn't bear thinking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And one other aspect in terms of the question that you asked, what should businesses, pay attention to when it comes
Mm.
to use of IoT within healthcare? In my view, the healthcare data and these two specific characteristics with the healthcare data in terms of trust and reliability, data reliability and trust is going to be the key sort of parameters that needs to be preserved by all the stakeholders within the space. How can they ensure that the healthcare data is reliable and trustworthy for use within healthcare? Remit is probably going to be the challenge. There are some solutions that exist in terms of
Yeah.
end-to-end encryption,
Yes.
encrypting data in rest, data in transit, all of that. But it still largely remains as an open challenge, both to the research community as well as the commercial entities within the space. That we don't yet have a solution
No.
to make sure that the data is reliable and fully trustworthy within the IoT healthcare products and technologies.
Ties you perfectly back to the CIA principle as well, doesn't it?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And one other point, perhaps it's although NIST, I don't know if your listeners are familiar with the NIST directive, the EU's NIST 2 directive, which will come.
Maybe you want to give like a 20-second rundown.
Well, yeah, NIST directive is Directive on Security of Network and Information Systems. That's the
Yeah.
expansion. And it basically, what we need to know with the NIST 2 directive, which will come into play in October 2024, is
Yeah.
it brings new and strict cybersecurity regulations for many
Yeah.
industries, particularly industries operating within the critical national infrastructure,
Hmm.
sector, out of which healthcare is a key, sector, key
Yeah.
player in that.
And that's important because when people think critical national infrastructure, they think of power, water, transport,
Right. Yeah.
maybe healthcare doesn't always come into that, perhaps in that infrastructure kind of sense.
Absolutely. Along with utilities, healthcare perhaps is one of the key player within the
Of
critical
course.
national infrastructure. So
Yeah.
under the NIS2 directive, organizations will have to comply with sort of new regulations where they need to protect the patient data, particularly within the healthcare sector.
Mhm.
Organizations will have to protect their patient data from cyber threats by implementing certain rigid cyber risk management measures, having
Yes.
clear incident reporting practices,
Yeah.
because currently reporting a cybersecurity threat or a breach is practically non-existent.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
live in a world where reporting is rarely taken seriously. It's also stigmatized if you report that your business has been breached or
Yeah.
has had a security incident. So NIS2 sort of forces organizations in healthcare to report any incident, secure patient data through proper storage and handling
Mhm.
practices and risk management and risk, assessment measures. While in the interim, while the NIS2 directive is being deployed and implemented, they
Mm.
can much of this is going to potentially increase the healthcare cost, which already is high,
Yeah.
uh, uh, simply because they may need new investments in new technologies, new processes to comply, and perhaps new, higher skilled workforce who could do the job for them, in terms of familiarity with regulatory spaces and demands.
Yeah.
All
Yeah.
of this will have, interim impact, but in the long term, healthcare sector will have this lasting, secure, resilient, trusted space, and which is essential given how digitized our healthcare system is becoming.
Do you feel there's a lack of trust then at the moment? The fact that you said this will create, and I guess there's 2 points, isn't there? One is that, let's face it, regulation drives behavior, right? And if we get people, if we get organizations to do the right behaviors, then regulation is probably one of the most effective tools to kind of do that. And then the other point is there a lack of trust? Because you said this will increase trust. Do you feel there's a lack of trust in the kind of security of the healthcare data that's or the healthcare industry
Absolutely.
maybe? Yeah, in your
Absolutely, there is a lack of trust, and of course, there could be research and statistics showing different demography of people have different levels of trust with
yeah,
the healthcare data. The younger population tend to go for the convenience that the digitized healthcare system provides them,
yes,
while also sacrificing on some of the privacy or
yeah,
related data. Whereas the slightly older generation tend to be more stringent with their need for privacy and securing their healthcare data. But then there is also potential for vested interests to get hold of this healthcare data. I don't know if your listeners will be familiar or not. On the dark web, healthcare data is the highest, bidded piece of data, not even financial
not in
pieces
financial
of
anymore.
information.
No, is
Healthcare
that
data is the data that fetches the highest amount of money. So
right?
for the malicious actors, breaching into healthcare data is really very, very attractive, lucrative.
And I think to some degree, economies of scale. The scarcity of the stolen information is probably not as wide reaching as, say, financial data, credit card data, etc. That's obviously very easy to access and perhaps compromise and resell, like you say, on the dark web. Whereas healthcare data is possibly more lucrative, and therefore it's still, the cost is still high. I guess, is that
Yeah,
fair to say?
yeah, absolutely. It's definitely fair, but the other aspect is also financial data, as a financial sector, is highly governed and regulated. You've got a very strong ombudsman, and you've got
Mm,
lots and
yeah,
lots of compliance and regulations playing around there. Unlike the digitized healthcare system, which is still
right.
coming, with the NIS2 directive that I mentioned earlier,
It's gonna
things may
right.
get better
Yeah,
because the organizations are going to be accountable for the breach of data, and The other aspect is there are other stakeholders who would be interested in knowing the insurance sector, for instance, and food and pharmaceutical sector. All of those entities have vested interest
Yes.
in understanding large healthcare sort of patterns and demographies. So making healthcare data a little more lucrative than financial data, for instance. And the fact that the sector is still less regulated compared to financial sector is the
Yeah.
other aspect. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I want to just take that conversation slightly on something you really briefly touched on, but want to delve into a little bit more. Is about the cyber security skills shortage. Now, it's something you've mentioned very, very briefly, but it is something that um, exists across all verticals and across the industry. Um, and there's multiple issues with this, which I'll kind of let you delve into really. But from your perspective, is the problem a lack of skills, or is it more a gap in understanding the skills? And the reason why I ask that is because there's an element sometimes of people just throwing resource at the industry, and it might not be in the right areas because they think, again, it's lucrative industry. Let's get people, let's take people, let's skill them up in a certain area, and let's push individuals down a particular route, which may or may not be relevant to the actual demands and needs. What's your take on that?
No, absolutely. This is one of my areas of passion, actually. I also, in addition to being a professor at the Open University, I wear a couple of hats and work closely with the two key organizations, the UK
Yeah.
Cybersecurity Council, as
Yes.
a member board of trustee, as well as the National Cybersecurity Centre, both of which are working towards creating this cybersecurity as a discipline, professionalizing the discipline, and
Mm.
creating this pool of talents that we need to ensure that we build this resilient digital economy for the country and remain so for the future. But coming to the skills gap, both your points are valid. There are numerous statistics that indicate severe shortage of cybersecurity professionals and
Yeah.
skills gap globally, and that applies to the United Kingdom as well. And there are more than 4 million cybersecurity jobs unfilled each year, and this number is not a figment of imagination. It
Yeah.
is
No,
it is an
yeah.
accurate figure. And one of the reasons for that, of course, is as I said earlier, cybersecurity as a discipline is emerging. There's not a clear, career pathway. Also
No.
seen as it's got an image of being highly technical, complex,
Yes.
even
Yeah.
geeky and
Mm.
dark and mysterious, leading to a very small uptake of cybersecurity related degrees amongst the secondary school, getting into the university education,
Yeah.
as well as people pursuing a career in cybersecurity, since there's no well-defined pathway or understanding of what the cyber as a career entails. There's very few people, pursuing the career, and even amongst those who pursue, it's a predominantly male workforce. So the
Still
shortage of
is, isn't it?
skill,
Yeah.
it is compared to so many other disciplines that we have. So the shortage of skills is not necessarily due to the lack of availability of the skills. It simply indicates that we are not casting our nets wider, not looking for those skills among the wider workforce that consists of women, ethnic minorities,
Yeah.
neurodiverse workforce from other sectors where skills are clearly transferable into the cyber
Yeah.
sector. Yeah, so the digital world, I always say this, the digital world is a pervasive world which connects various verticals and domains. Consequently, cybersecurity challenges are equally sort of varied and diverse, which only a very diverse, inclusive workforce can effectively address. So it's all the more important to keep cybersecurity sector as diverse and inclusive as
Yeah.
possibly can. Basically, reducing those sort of removing those barriers to entry for those
Mm.
wider group of workforce. And also demonstrating that cybersecurity is a as a discipline is requires wide set of skills, not just technical skills.
Technical.
There's a
Yeah.
huge variety of non-technical skills that is required within the sector. I'll probably speak a bit about what the council and even the NCSC is trying to do.
Yeah. I was gonna.
Yeah,
Yeah, sorry, Chitra. I was actually going to say, well, obviously you're coming at it from the university, from university, from educational institutions. How about kind of businesses and let's say policymakers as well, if they got the finger on the pulse? How can they make cybersecurity training align better with industry?
absolutely. So cyber is a tier one threat in the UK. That's classified.
Hmm.
So we have a clear national strategy which includes, skills and building a workforce to secure a digital, secure the digital economy that we're trying to build within the country. Educational institutions, not just the higher education
Hmm.
institutes, but the secondary schools and further educational institutes have a huge role to play in building this cybersecurity capability and a talent pool to ensure that UK grows into the secure digital, resilient digital economy. As an
Yeah,
educator, one of my goals is to demystify cybersecurity for students, for workforce in the businesses, for larger population. I'm quite passionate, and much of my work in the last 10 years has focused on how do we change the way we teach cybersecurity, the
yes,
way we see cybersecurity, and how can we demystify cyber as a term, as a discipline, as a profession for the wider population. And I firmly believe in the digital world we live in, cybersecurity is everybody's concern, and it is our
yeah,
responsibility to get everyone on board through large scale sort of cybersecurity awareness programs. So, but now it can't be done just by the educational institutes alone. There needs to be clear engagement and participation from within the government, which is what the government did 4 years ago with the establishment of the Cybersecurity Council that
yeah,
focuses on laying a foundation to cybersecurity as a profession that will sort
yeah.
of enable us to respond to the evolving needs of the industry
Of the
and the
industry.
wider.
Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. And National Cybersecurity Center has this accreditation program that helps universities to create curriculum that meets the specific industry needs. So
yeah,
to ensure that we're not, churning out graduates that don't necessarily meet the industry needs and demands.
yeah,
Uh, and been, Unfortunately, that has been the case in the past. We've not created graduates who are billable from day one.
yeah.
We're creating graduates with certain core academic skills, but not necessarily those skills that the industry needs today.
Correct. Yeah,
So, yeah.
and that's something we've taken graduates on, and we're fortunate that some of them have been really really great. Have performed really well in the organisation. But you're right. I think, to some degree, it's more about their own personal skills and the actual specific content that they've picked up in their university or postgrad.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah,
I think that what's required is a closer industry academia nexus for
yeah,
long-term sustainable cyber, capability building or the cyber talent pool that we need. We
yeah,
need to make our curriculum, our education and training a little more competency based and skills based. With deep involvement, close involvement by the industry and the third sector. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, there's also need for us to sort of cast our nets much wider, look for those target groups, such as, retaining the workforce within sectors that are undergoing digital transformation,
yeah,
serve those underserved groups by lowering those barriers, removing those barriers. And as
yeah,
someone who works for the Open University, we, function around that core principle of making, these not just the cutting edge technologies such as cyber, but general higher education accessible by breaking those barriers for the underserved groups.
yeah. Because it's important to understand industry as well as just the technical aspect.
Absolutely.
Kind of goes back to your previous point.
Absolutely. And last but not the least, it's important for us to boost the equality and diversity, from the careers, right from the early contact through to the employment and removing those barriers to entry and sort of serve those poorly served groups within the
Yeah.
sector. So diversity and inclusion in all forms, neurodiverse to gender and race and
Yes.
ethnicity,
Yeah.
is required. Absolutely.
Okay. Great. And I guess to sort of finish, really, I'm asking one other area is it wouldn't be a cybersecurity, especially we're talking about in such a broad sense. We're talking about some fairly broad topics here. So let's talk a little bit about emerging technologies around cybersecurity, and we can't talk about emerging technologies without talking about generative AI and language learning modules. What's again fairly broad conversation. What new risks that we haven't already addressed do they pose to businesses? Because it is the word of the moment, isn't it? AI and LLM.
Yeah, absolutely. There's lots of, I mean, I did mention about fear mongering. There is definitely a lot of fear mongering,
Yeah.
but the truth cannot be ignored that artificial intelligence, Gen AI and LLM is enabling cyber criminals to generate highly personalized, highly sophisticated, unique attacks at scale. And meanwhile, cyber defense is playing catch up, relying on historical attack data to spot
Yeah.
threats when they occur, more of a defense stance. And so less skilled cyber actors will most certainly benefit from significant capability uplift that I normally say, which the Gen AI and the LLMs can offer. So in terms of newer threats, sophisticated attacks and the phishing scams that that's been around for decades now is still
Yeah.
going to be the problem in the next century, next decade as well.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely, isn't it? Yeah.
simply because there's going to be more convincing phishing scams
Yeah.
interactions. You're not going to have those grammatical, translational, spelling errors that would give
No,
away phishing scams anymore.
absolutely.
And with the deep fakes and voice emulations, they're just going to be that much more authentic, regardless of the level of cybersecurity, understanding anyone has. Everyone might just be a victim of a spoofing or a phishing attack.
I recently
But
heard something. Well, one of our technical team said this on a meeting we had the other day. I think a deep fake voice emulation only needs 3 seconds of your voice to be able to generate something of that note.
absolutely. And
Yeah.
what's probably most worrying, Anish, is the recent study conducted by NCSC reveals commoditization of cybercrime capability. For
Mm.
example, offering cybercrime as a service business model.
Yeah.
Highly sophisticated AI-enabled cyber tools will be available for anyone who's willing to
Mm.
pay. So,
Absolutely.
so that much more, accelerated attacks and that much more sophisticated attack
Yeah.
is going to be seen in the world. Although it may, may sound as being, giving that threat or the fear,
Yeah. Yeah.
but
No, but
that's the
it's real.
situation, unfortunately, given the potency of how these tools can, uplift the low threat actors, which previously were struggling with the, script kiddies and few tools that was
Yeah.
available for them on the internet. They've suddenly been given the most sort of dangerous weapon.
Yeah. Absolutely. I've often said that real life business, or legitimate business, I should say, is typically mirrored by threat actors because they have a goal. Ordinary businesses have a goal, and so they're going to adopt whatever accelerates their business model, for want of a better expression, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess sort of round up really a couple of questions. How do businesses strengthen their approach to cybersecurity, using almost, and I guess there's two aspects, isn't there, to AI? There's security for AI and using AI in security. I guess it's a former of those two.
Yeah, absolutely. The tools that I was mentioning is going to uplift the low threat actors are the very same tools that's available for the cyber defense as well. So
Yeah.
I'm quite optimistic that AI, Gen AI, and LLMs will accelerate the progress in the space of automated defenses. For instance,
It's good to
one
have
big
some good to have some optimism around it because there's a lot of
absolutely.
pessimism.
Yeah, absolutely. For instance, one big advantage that AI has immediately made possible is the detection of zero-day attacks, which was
Yes.
previously was nearly impossible.
No.
And AI algorithms can sort of analyze data and so quickly in real time
Yeah.
to identify patterns, indicating potential threats, and learning through the historical data. So the cyber defense, as I said, is going to be that much more sophisticated and that much more advanced due to the AI capabilities. And I also feel that AI can be a boon for streamlining compliance tasks, minimizing errors. AI could be used as a tool to do horizon scanning of
Yeah.
regulatory requirements,
Yeah.
compliance, etc. So most
Yeah.
businesses will comply much more than they previously did. And I also personally, one of my areas of work is cybersecurity awareness training, and AI could be is what the doctors ordered for cybersecurity training and awareness sector.
Yeah.
So addressing the cybersecurity threats caused due to human errors, particularly, that could gain so much more using the AI-based tools. Simply because the current training and awareness sector is such a one-size-fits-all sort of tick box exercise, which can now with AI can be powered into a very customized, personalized, behavior-driven training.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you will have that much more, well-trained, capability workforce, and
Mm.
well, aware of various cyber hygiene and cyber, behavior practices, with more of the customized, personalized training that AI can
That
enable.
can
Yeah.
enable. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. And then just to link back what you said there about, well, so previously you talked about kind of regulatory changes. We talked about how it kind of drives behavior. What about kind of ethical and maybe regulate? I mean, ethical around AI is probably a massive topic. We probably wouldn't even cover it in another 2 hours. But in terms of touching on ethical and maybe regulatory challenges, um, how can business address those?
Yeah. Any business, cybersecurity business using AI,
Mm.
are going to face the same sort of ethical and regulatory challenges
Yeah.
faced by any other sector using AI, Gen
Yeah.
AI, for instance. The AI biases, for instance, or hallucinations, or the lack of
Yeah.
transparency that the Gen AI brings in. All of them applies to cybersecurity as well, except that the implication when it comes to their use in cybersecurity could be unique and sometimes
Yeah.
even adverse, simply because all of these challenges with the AI, lack of transparency, for instance, in cybersecurity processes or technologies, could lead to mistrust and unaccountability. These are pillars on which the cybersecurity sectors stand on. So AI could damage the very foundational pillars of cybersecurity. So the careful consideration of use of AI, Gen AI, within the cyber is essential at this point in time, simply because AI brings with it the
Yeah.
lack of transparency and lack of trust and
It
accountability,
does.
which is
Yeah.
so counterintuitive for the cyber as a sector. And of course, ethical concerns with deep fake and misinformation, the fake news, all of that that the internet is currently reeling with already will only
Yes.
be exacerbated with the
It will
use of
be
AI, Gen
exacerbated.
AI. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's how I see Gen AI is going to affect cyber sector sort of much more than the other sectors,
Mm.
in
It,
terms
it,
of,
it feels that way, doesn't it?
yeah, in terms of
Honestly, we could.
ethical challenges, certainly in terms of that.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Honestly, I feel like we could talk for another hour on all these subjects, but I'm just gonna get, maybe we'll wrap up using one final piece. Um, Collaboration is something we talk about quite early on, and information sharing. Businesses are a little bit reluctant to do that. How how do you think organizations and businesses need to facilitate some of this information? I know you touched on some areas, but maybe if we use that as a wrap up.
Yeah, certainly.
Wrap it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is a no-brainer that collaborative effort between businesses, governments, various cybersecurity organizations, and the bodies that exist will be far more effective and efficient to combat cybersecurity threats. That's what we need in an ideal world.
Yeah.
Sharing threat intelligence from across multiple vertical domains, resource pooling across various
Yeah.
entities will enhance our response capabilities immensely. However, there is a need for having a very standardized process and protocol for sharing these best practices. We need a more authoritative, although the term authoritative may not sound as positive, but we need a sound voice
Sure.
advisory where these
Yeah.
best practices could be shared.
Yes.
And sharing and collaboration should be incentivized through public-private partnership, because
Right.
as I mentioned earlier, we live in an industry where reporting cybersecurity incidents and sharing experiences of data breaches is stigmatized, even
Yeah.
penalized indirectly or directly.
Mm, mm.
So therefore, we have a long way to establish this collaborative, culture within the
Yeah.
sector. But it is, as I said, a no-brainer. There's a need for collaborative effort across all these stakeholders to combat these rising cybersecurity threats. Cross-sector events, conferences, forums, and podcasts such as yours, which brings in people from across sectors talking about the same challenges and problems,
Yeah.
could be a way of sharing those grievances, a shared problem, and identifying common solutions. Could play a big role in enabling sort of these efforts of collaboration, as I said. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's a big one, isn't it? Really, and I think if we solve that problem, I think we're well on the way. But I'm not super optimistic that, because there is a huge barrier, isn't there, to that willingness to kind of share and be open. And maybe we'll have you on again in a year or so's time, and we'll see how we see
How
how
it
we got
goes,
on
yeah.
from last time. Yeah. But yeah, it's been, like I said before, we could talk for another couple of hours, I think, on some of these subjects. So it's been absolutely fascinating to talk to you, Chitra. I hope you found it beneficial, and I hope our listeners have found it really interesting as well. We'll make sure we put some of the links and notes into the notes on the podcast. And yeah, thanks again. Any final words from you as a wrap up?
Uh, well, yeah, as you said, we could go on talking about this. And I try to share areas that I'm passionate about, where areas
Yeah.
that I've worked in the past, and areas that I'm probably informed about. And I'm hoping this will be useful to your listeners.
Oh,
It was indeed
definitely.
a fascinating conversation, Anish. Thank you
Oh,
for having me. Yeah.
yeah. Thank you so much.